The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
A very good morning to you all. This is Squawk Box Monday morning. Karen Cho is in the seat. I'm here as well, Steve Sedgwick. And these are your headlines after a quite extraordinary May. Well, so much for selling in May because the Nasdaq posted its best month of the year, whilst the Dow notches its best day since November on Friday as the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, well, it hit some expectations, slightly higher on other expectations. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang unveils the company's next set of AI chips, but its rival AMD looks to share the spoils, announcing its own range of AI processors.
India's Narendra Modi looks on course at this stage as he aims for a landslide victory in the world's biggest election. While in South Africa, the ruling ANC loses its majority for the first time, but insists it is standing by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Ukraine's Volodomyr Zelenskyy claims Russia is using China to disrupt peace plans, with NATO's Bauer telling CNBC there is hypocrisy in Beijing's positions.
It's still fascinating how they can talk about the importance of those two elements of international law, sovereignty and internationally recognized borders, and at the same time not condemn Russia.
And online fast fashion giant Shein prepares to file its IPO prospectus in London as soon as this week, according to Sky News, with the company eyeing a valuation of around £50 billion. How you doing?
Well, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. Got my West Indies tan.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, a couple of weeks in the West Indies.
Just 2 hours in the British sun does
Actually, it was Suffolk. Yeah, much nicer. No, as nice. Of course, West Indies where the Cricket World Cup is at the moment, so I'm sure you're aware of that. So that'll be exciting. What an amazing week you've had.
Yes.
Genuinely, there was excitement every day, and I was determined not to look, but I did look actually.
Right.
And Friday, I thought just typified everything. You've got huge rally. You've got Salesforce bouncing off a disastrous decline the day before. You've got Nvidia doing what Nvidia does. You've got record buybacks in the month as well. You've got change of leadership. You've got aggressive moves on energy as well. It was really quite a stunning week.
Can I call it bumps in the road, leaving us a little bit airborne as you go over those bumps and then coming down, crashing down,
especially
right?
the speed you drive.
Well, to the point around the AI story, I think we saw that speed bump hit around Salesforce, the stock deflating as investors took stock of some of the valuations that, well, doesn't really apply to software companies at this stage. And then we saw the recovery taking place Friday session for Salesforce. So there was a bump there.
Dell as well. I mean, it's something that we didn't spend a huge amount of time, because obviously it was after our show's hours, but server sales disappointing. Now, big increase in sales, but nowhere near as expected. And so Dell, which went back to the market, you and I remember it being taken off and then going back on the market in 2018, they had their worst daily performance, I mean, huge decline, since they went back on the market in 2018 as well. So it's just I think speed bumps, oscillation, volatility, this ain't going to be smooth sailing when you've got the kind of valuations attached to AI that are being attached to Nvidia, but it's been extrapolated perhaps a little bit generously to too many other companies.
Same story too when it comes to monetary policy. The market's been hoping for those rate cuts, and every time we get another strong piece of data, we go over that speed bump and there's some disappointment, and we pick ourselves back up again. I think we've seen that over time.
Because they're just, I mean, you've got, I think, was it Kashkari again saying, just we could be here for a while, ladies and gentlemen, we could be here for a while. Plus the PCE. Now, my headline said, in line with expectations. I think the core was a little bit disappointing for people, if I'm being pedantic, 2.8%. But either way, it's not the landing zone that the Federal Reserve hoped for, and yet the market has its record day almost.
Well, the problem is we've had some stronger inflation prints. Now we seem to be going sideways, and even sideways is a problem when the Fed is looking for that inflation number to start to fall back towards 2%. So that is a problem as we talk about whether monetary policy is tight enough at this stage whether we are truly done in terms of some of the heavy lifting from monetary policy.
Isn't it? But I mean, I guess our viewers should know a little bit about what happened that Dow.
Let me talk you through the markets. It's incredible what we've seen over the course of the month, but let's just start with that Friday picture for the Dow, the S&P and the Nasdaq, and you can see very different performance for the Dow versus the Nasdaq. 1.5% up for the Dow, but trading flat for the Nasdaq in that Friday session. Salesforce, actually the big moving stock as we saw that recovery come back into play for Salesforce in that Friday session, so very much leading the market higher. In terms of what we had elsewhere across the other major boards for the likes of the S&P, it was also Salesforce, a big driver, and you can see that market up 0.8%. But for the Nasdaq, the biggest moving stock to the upside was Apple. To the downside, it was Broadcom. You can see there was a real tug of war taking place. To me, what was fascinating, if you take a look at some of the boards for May, typically sell in May and go away is the old adage we use on markets. Not the case for 2024. In fact, it was again more buying in May, as we saw the Nasdaq propped up to the tune of almost 7%, 4.8 on the S&P 500, the Dow up 2.3%. Now, typically, as we've been talking about these rallies, it has been FANG plus stocks leading the charge, but it's not FANGs this time round. It is technology still, but it's semiconductors. And if you look at the performance of the FANG stocks over the course of the trading month, the FANG stocks themselves were trading down 0.75%, down for the week as well, versus the semiconductor stocks. And of course, Nvidia symbolises that, up 12% for the trading month. So the heavy lifting very much away from the FANG stocks to the big chip plays. Nvidia stock, as you can see, bouncing more than the rest of the tech space. In fact, doubled 26% to treasuries. And let's just take stock, because don't forget we saw that sideways inflation data. The market did see a little bit of movement here, and you can see yields this morning a little bit lower. We have 4.87% on the 2-year, the 10-year just drifting off the 4.5% mark. Initial sell-off in the dollar too, as we saw the data from the PC across. This is the morning trade as we cross over to foreign exchange markets and take a look at the dollar trade. We are seeing a little bit more strength come back into some of these trades. Sterling dollar flat, but we've got euro dollar trading up by about 0.1%. We were 108.5. Big picture, we were watching the ECB this week to see whether the ECB does in fact cut interest rates, and if it's so, if we're going to be looking at a follow-up in July. So very big market moving action on this side of the world this week, instrumental for the euro. Dollar yen this morning, we are seeing that climb though. We're 157.40 roughly, up a fraction. Dollar also supported versus what we're seeing on the yuan, Steve.
I'm so excited about the Paris Olympics coming up. I know you are as well, being a great sports aficionado as well. And they start, of course, next month as well. And it's good to know that the company handling the data is doing so well. Atos, which has, quite frankly, fallen 76% so far this year. It's been subject to multiple bids, this, that and the other. It's now got a market cap of 186 million euros, but it's still got debt, unfortunately, of around about 4 million euros. Of course, Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky, who's very much involved in the Royal Mail bid here in the United Kingdom, was one of the suitors. There is a lot going on here, but we've got a big announcement and restructuring from the company, the French government, the company, both. 2 revised financial restructuring proposals. Board of Directors authorised management to work with the group's financial creditors to ensure maximum support is likely to be secured for one of the proposals by the 5th of June. So 2 days' time. Final agreement on financial restructuring still targeted for July 2024. Well, coincide nicely with them handling the data for the Olympics, won't it? Anyway, proposed from a consortium comprising One Point, Butler Industries and Econocom, and a group of the company's creditors. But the point I wanted to make was about the government, if I can find that bit. Here we go. The French government confirms 50 million loan from the French state. But here we go. This is interesting. Potential acquisition by the French state of 100% of advanced computing, mission critical systems and cybersecurity product activities of Atos. So there were bits of the company which you talked about, we've talked about, Charlotte has talked about all the way through, that were absolutely seen as national security assets. The government's just had those and said the rest of it is for the market to work out.
Yeah, good summary. I don't think I can add much, but I think it's fair to say the French government wants to ensure it's locking down all these key assets to make sure nothing happens in this transaction where those assets go astray. So we're just hearing more detail around that.
Right, OK, super, we'll move on. It's a bumper week for markets, investors waiting the ECB's... Didn't we have the rate decision from the ECB about a month ago? So I thought,
this is the key one.
I know. I thought we already knew what they were doing in June. I thought they were cutting by 25 basis points.
Well,
haven't they told us this for a month?
Unless something happens. So that's been the edge of the seat moment in case there's a geopolitical story, oil price spike.
Would you stake your house on it?
Well, not with the geopolitics as they are. Maybe in
I'd
another
be
several
close.
years
It's
back.
as close
perhaps.
as a slam dunk as you get in these markets, isn't it? Anyway, I won't on this occasion. ECB's rate decision on Thursday, with the central bank widely expected to make its first cut. Before then, though, we're watching out for the PMIs in Europe today, and in the US for that matter, with results from the Indian election due on Tuesday. Biggest election on the planet, actually. We're also having key data out of China and Japan on Wednesday. Rounding out the week, voting begins in the EU elections on Thursday. I know this because Sylvia Mara is the most exciting person I've ever seen in the office this morning. In the EU elections on Thursday, and non-farm payrolls are due out from the United States on Friday.
Let's get to Eric Silvestre, who is a senior investment analyst at Wealthify. Eric, thank you very much for joining us. We were talking about the PCE numbers, sideways inflation data. This is something that Neil Kashkari was talking to us about over the course of this week as well. Just give us a sense as to what this means for the Fed and whether we need to stay higher for longer at this point rather than pricing in any rate cuts for this year.
Well, good morning, first of all, Karen. Good morning, Steve. Thank you for having me. So, yeah, we had, as you were mentioning, the PCE numbers have been very up and down. It's very unclear to have a sense of direction in this market. When you look at the longer term trend, that core services inflation has been stuck at that 4% area. And even the shorter term, that 6-month annualized data that the Fed likes to watch so much is still pointing upward. So it's understandable when Neil Kashkari comes and says that, look, guys, we need to wait a little bit longer and see what happens. So in terms of rate cuts and expectations, that provided some relief in terms of the personal income data slowing and seeing US consumers actually spending less. So that was, I believe, a welcome relief for the Fed, which perhaps will add a little bit more of a dovish tilt going forward. So in terms of where sentiment is at the moment, I believe the Fed has already sent very hawkish signals. So perhaps a bit of a moderation in that sense.
Where it comes to sentiment, Eric, it feels as though investors are still trading the thematic, and the one thematic they have to trade is AI. So in the context where they don't have all the clues they want around monetary policy, they keep going in one direction towards AI stocks. Would you agree with that?
That's right. I mean, we had a really strong Q1 earnings season, and perhaps now the market has gone from focusing from AI to EI, employment and inflation going forward. So perhaps there's the one bit that can derail that strong performance that we've seen over the past month. It's true that the market came from a very weak performance in April, so some of that has been a rebound. And when you look at some of the earnings that we're seeing, is just beat everywhere that you look at. And it's fair to say that there are reasons to be optimistic. There are reasons to believe that some of those earnings are really, really hard to predict, to the point that markets are providing valuations to those companies that seem unbelievable until then they come and deliver. So that is very much the confusion, I would say, in markets at the moment, that you have to contrast that very strong sentiment from earnings to perhaps the more hawkish rhetoric that's coming from the Fed at the moment.
So, Eric, let me put my words into your mouth, not your words. Then basically, a vast amount of this market, let's just say, for the sake of argument, 9 out of 10 stocks are valued the wrong price because they're valued on the growth scenario we're seeing, as you and Karen mentioned, out of AI, which has shown proven revenue and profit potential at the Nvidias of this world. But there are other companies who can't possibly match those kind of profitability spectrum levels that we're going to see from Nvidia, and yet are still getting the benefit of the doubt. That leaves a lot of this market trading on thin air.
That's right. I mean, when we look at valuations across the market, we are seeing forward-looking P's of around 20 times, which when you compare against the current real yields for the 10-year, that's standing at 2.1%, I believe, at the moment. So those valuations are not consistent with the current level of real yield. So unless we see a massive dovish tilt from the Fed, those valuations won't make sense. At the same time, we need to continue delivering on those earnings in the quarters coming forward. So It is true that the market is becoming extremely demanding, and proof of that is the fact that although we had better than expected earnings for Q1, the price reaction wasn't that great. When you look at the underlying data, the price reaction for some of those beats actually didn't perform as expected.
Eric, a very good friend of mine who's been in the markets over 30 odd years, a terrific friend of mine, he said, yeah, just got to sell the first rate cut. And I know he just threw that out at me, but it made me think a lot, and it's made me think since he said that as well. Because by the time we get the first rate cut in the United States, for sake of argument as well, something's going to have happened to the household, something's going to have happened to that wealth creation, that net income of the household, which is the bedrock of the US economy as well. Do you have sympathy for the view to sell the first rate cut rather than it being a green light to buy even more equity?
Well, history would suggest so. I mean, when you look at the past performance of US markets on the 6 months post first rate cut, the performance has been positive. At the same time, I would say it's hard to compare like for like. It's also true that we have another big elephant in the room that we perhaps didn't have in the past, which is the amount of QE that has been pumped into the markets. The Fed actually recently slowed that pace of reduction of the balance sheet, and that perhaps has a much greater impact going forward than the short end of the curve, which is the part that the Fed is trying to influence. So in general, I would say historically, yes, that is the way to go in terms of participating in the markets, but then at the same time is worth looking at other components and perhaps looking at the extent to which the labor market is impacted by the months coming forward.
Eric, in the context as we're talking about the macro, let me ask you about the ECB this week. We are setting up for another rate decision, expected to be a rate cut, but inflation going in the wrong direction. The latest number rising to 2.6% for the Eurozone. How are you thinking about this side of the world and what we could expect for markets as they wait it out for the ECB?
Well, the differential between ECB and Fed has been significant over the past few months, and perhaps now we're seeing a bit of a convergence of those two, with the euro gaining in the past month. And, you know, I guess, as you were mentioning earlier in the show, it's very much priced in that the ECB will hike rates this week. But most of the focus will go into what will happen after. So very much listening to the sentiment of ECB president and looking at coming data. I don't think they will want to react too much to the latest numbers. As we were mentioning in the US, the data month to month can be extremely volatile. So they will want to see a bit more evidence that pickup in inflation is sustainable in order to change course.
Eric, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Great to have you on board. Eric Silvestro with us, Senior Investment Analyst at Wealthify. Let's take a look at the Asian markets in session today, picking up from a strong picture from the Dow, but of course a flat picture from the Nasdaq. And you can see these boards picking up on the Dow's cues. We're 1.2 on the green for the Japanese stock market. Hong Kong trading up almost 2.5%. Very strong day playing out there versus China, where we're seeing a modest dip down almost 0.5%. Australia perched higher, 0.75% in the green. Meantime, let's take a look at the data we're getting. China's manufacturing activity beat expectations in May after growing at the fastest pace in nearly 2 years. The Kaizen factory PMI rose to 51.7 last month from 51.4 in April. It comes after official data Friday showed China's manufacturing sector unexpectedly contracting in May. And a look at the opening calls this morning for Europe. We're setting up for a nice day in the green early on. Significant actually for the DAX. 3 digits, 180 odd points to the upside. We're looking at 387 on the FTSE MIB, so very decent session. We did have a modest upbeat session for the Stock 600 Friday. We were up about 0.33%, so we are looking to extend out those gains and recapture some of the territory we've lost in the past week. And let's take a look at Nvidia, which announced a new generation of AI chips in a surprise move just 3 months after its most recent launch. The chipmaker unveiled a new Rubin chip, a successor to its Blackwell chip, which is currently in production and will ship later this year. Rubin is expected to be rolled out in 2026. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang said the company will release new models on a, quote, one-year rhythm in order to strengthen its market dominance. Emily Tan is at the Computex annual conference in Taipei and filed this report.
AMD's new AI chips are the fastest in the market. Opening for Computex at Taipei, Lisa Su unveiled Strix Point for Copilot Plus, which will be the first product with 50 TOPS. That's 50 trillion operations per second and the speed of the NPU. She went on to invite executives from Microsoft, HP, Lenovo, and Asus on stage to announce their respective AI PCs coming to market. Now this means AMD will outpace Qualcomm's Snapdragon X Elite, which is running at 45 TOPS in the AI PCs currently available on the market. Nearly all major US chip firm bosses are attending the tech trade show this week. Nvidia boss Jensen Huang got a rock star welcome with more than 4,000 attending, and that includes the heads of TSMC and Foxconn. Jensen said AI is driving a new industrial revolution.
It's a new industrial revolution. We have now a new factory producing a new commodity for every industry that is of extraordinary value. And the methodology for doing this is quite scalable. And the methodology of doing this is quite repeatable. Notice how quickly so many different AI models, generative AI models, are being invented, literally daily. Every single industry is now piling on.
The heads of Intel and MediaTek are scheduled to make their keynotes on Tuesday. Reporting from Computex in Taipei, I'm Emily Tan.
So coming up on the show, we're going to bring you election updates from around the world as results and exit polls trickle in from India, South Africa and Mexico. Plus, Ukrainian President Volodomyr Zelenskyy makes an unscheduled appearance at the Shangri-La Dialogue, calling for countries to back this month's Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland. And we'll bring you our conversation with the IATA Director General Willie Walsh at the group's AGM as safety concerns hit the aviation sector. Don't miss that interview coming up at 7:30 Central European Time on this show.
Ambition to me is about doing better.
I think ambition creates a pathway.
The best advice I can give someone starting off a career is don't have a career, have lots of careers, try loads of different things.
Talk to people and put your ambition out there.
I don't feel that I've hit peak ambition because it's a learning journey.
CNBC is where ambition meets opportunity. What does living ambitiously mean to you? Hear it from our CNBC anchors, reporters and global business leaders on CNBC.com.
Exit polls in India are projecting that Prime Minister Narendra Modi could increase his alliance's majority in parliament following the world's biggest election. Results are due tomorrow and, if confirmed, could provide a boost to the country's financial markets amid hopes of economic reforms and policy continuity. Claudia Sheinbaum is on course to be Mexico's first female president, with the nation's ruling party declaring her winner of the country's presidential election by a large margin. Multiple exit polls also predict Steinbaum's victory, although the opposition candidate has not conceded the winner will take office in October for a 6-year term. South Africa's ANC has lost its parliamentary majority for the first time, receiving just over 40% of the vote. A coalition government is now on the cards, with the ANC saying it has started negotiations with all major parties. Aaron Bile joining us to discuss. Well, we were talking about the possibility of this all last week, so just walk us through the implications.
Look, I think it's actually worse than the detail somewhat, right? The polls had, at best, the ANC actually having around 45% of this election in terms of the vote count at the end. 40% is ultimately dismal. It's one of those that the ANC's leader, Cyril Ramaphosa, and president of the country, is probably going to look back on and wonder if he actually gets to survive this. Now, there have been question marks around whether he will actually stay in power for the ANC, whether the ANC itself will actually try and cast him out of the party. But the question mark around that is then who becomes the candidate that all the other parties will then be willing to take on. There are many fears, of course, that the coming up of the MK party, which is the Mkhonto weSizwe, led by former President Jacob Zuma, has garnered even greater support than many had anticipated, nearly 15%, beating out the Economic Freedom Fighters, which was seen as a very populist party as well in the country. So the question marks around whether South Africa will have stability of economic growth from here, stability of of reforms as well from here are big question marks. You've even seen the currency actually lose out significantly on the back of these results. And whether that will be sustained, I mean, the Democratic Alliance, which is the official opposition, even they, who did manage to gain an extra 3 seats in Parliament, have big question marks, though, as to whether they'll be able to help lead South Africa forward.
Thank you for listening to Squawk Box Europe Express.
For more market-moving news, you can head to cnbc.com.
Or join us again on the show with Steve Sedgwick, Karen Cho, and myself, Arabile Kumete, weekdays on CNBC.